and welcome back. Time for our Impact interview. I just hope he's blocked off plenty of time for this, because we could talk to this week's guest for a long time and still only scratch the surface on a variety of his successes in football and beyond. Of course, it all connects with his time as a standout player for Penn State. Matt Millen, thanks for joining us. Jay and I are really excited because you were teammates with Tom, and we want to ask you for some good college stories on Scrap here, for sure.
Careful, Matt.
I don't really have any good college stories on Scrap other than the time.
Oh, and it ends there.
The times, plural.
Scrap guy, and I've been Scrap my guy for, since 1975 or 6, Scrap. What was it? 76, I think.
Yes.
So, no, the only Scrapper story I would have is really kind of not very good, so I won't go there.
We'll save that maybe for the web exclusive part. Well, look, Matt, we call this the Impact interview, so let's start with that part of it. In 2019, you're given Penn State's highest honor, the Distinguished Alumni Award. In that speech, you talked about your life-saving heart transplant. For those who don't understand the importance of checking that organ donor box on your driver's license application, talk personally about the importance of that, not only just for you, but for everyone who might be on a waiting list.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's one of those things that you don't know. So just the whole thing of organ donorship is a big deal. And you don't really understand it until you're on the other side of it, right? And so having done that, I've always been one to check that box. And so I thought, heck, if I can't use it, somebody else can. Well, it turns out that I was the other one who needed it. And thankfully, there were enough people who did check that box, and I was able to get one of those hearts. And the person who gave up their heart for me was it was a drug overdose. And so you don't know what age, you don't know when, you don't know why, you don't know all the different questions, but you do know that there are people who need them. And so, so I think that's an important thing.
Well, Matt, we're glad you got it and that you're still, as they say, on the right side of the grass. But let me get into some of the football part of this. You saw Maryland last week, and you saw Penn State play Maryland last year, but they always seem to be a team that can look great one week and struggle the next week. So for Penn State fans looking forward to this game this weekend, what should Penn State fans be most worried about as they play Maryland?
I think when Tagovailoa is on, he's really good. When Tagovailoa sets his feet, keeps his eyes downfield, and gets good push off his back foot, and his footwork is right, I think he's pretty darn good. They have good speed on the outside, but I think Penn State's secondary this might be the best secondary I've seen them have. So they've got some good cover people, and I like their safeties. I think the biggest thing I don't think they're going to run the ball very well against the Penn State team, but I think the pass game is what you're going to have to watch for.
Hey, Matt, before I ask my question, I do want to say this. Thank you for 1978. Of all my years in football, that season was the greatest season. And I'll 78, and I'm not going counting January 1st, 79. Just that 78 year, the spring and the fall, with the group of guys and the fun we have was, often I tell people that was the best year of my life, and you had a big part of it. But thank you very much.
Oh, heck. Are you kidding me, Scrap? We all had a blast.
That was awesome.
We didn't even know we were having a blast. Heck, the great unifying thing was his dad, right? So we all had our stories about Joe to be able to keep us going. And so
Absolutely.
To be honest with you, it was a great year for his coaching and his staff. It was just one of them years that all came together at the right time. We just all we needed was 7 more points, and we'd have been a lot happier.
We sure would have. But hey, Penn State has lost 3 games in a row. What things do you see us being critical for them to improve heading into November's stretch, starting with Maryland, but also with the 3 other teams that could pose problems for them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, Scrap, for them right now is they need some balance in offense, right? They can't run the football, and they should be a better offensive line than they are. When I watch their film, I watch it and I look at it, and I was like, in fact, a couple of times I went in and talked to a couple of the coaches, asking them about their zone scheme, the inside zone, outside zone, a couple different things, and it's just not they're just not getting it done. They don't get any push. But I'll say this. Of all the film that I've been watching all across the Big Ten and all of college football, I think because of probably spread offenses and the RPO games, I think run blocking in college football is atrocious across the board. I don't see teams coming off the ball flat backed anymore. I don't see people striking them. And, you know, a lot of time we're talking about mostly zone schemes, but you got the gap scheme stuff and you have some man scheme things, but they just, you know, I go to practices and to be honest with you, they play like they practice. They stand straight up and down and there's no leverage and there's no low pad levels. And I think it's an epidemic across college football. So I don't think Penn State's alone, but I do think Penn State has to have more balance in an offense by running football.
As I mentioned, so much to discuss with Matt. He's going to stick around for more with us. We're going to step aside for the TV show to take a break. We will continue our interview with Matt. So if you want to see the entire conversation, make sure you go to NittanyGameWeek.com for the rest of the interview along with other web-exclusive content. PSU fans show up everywhere, including the Horseshoe. We have our Pride picks left to show you, and we'll talk about who to look for when the Nittany Lions kick off against the Terps. We're heading into the final minutes on Nittany Game Week. Matt, for the purposes of this interview, you're the greatest player to ever come out of Whitehall High School, right? So, but there's some other players that are coming around lately. You're part of the state. A couple of guys have, with Saquon Barkley, Jahan Dotson. What's going on up there in Whitehall?
Well, that's where Saquon came out of. And Say was, that was his nickname in high school, but Say was coached by my brother. And my brother, I'll give you a good story. So my brother is, he's coaching this kid. And I said, hey, how's it going this year? And he goes, good. We have this sophomore running back. He's unbelievable. He makes moves you wouldn't believe. He can accelerate. I said, well, is he a next level player? And he goes, yeah, I think he's going to be I think he's legit. And I go, well, how many yards does he have this year running? And he goes, oh, we're not playing him. He's behind a senior. And I go, that's great, coach. That's outstanding coaching. He says, I'm coaching him now at the outside linebacker spot. I was like, oh my God. So he turns out to be Barkley and probably maybe the greatest runner that Penn State's ever had. And of course, the next 2 years in high school, he just tears it up. But when my brother had him, he was a linebacker.
And on the bench. Hey, Matt, part of your broadcast career, you spent time training and being an official, and you officiated a game. And fans and coaches of every team are always convinced of two things. Officials can and should see everything, and all officials are out to get their team and only their team. Having had that experience, can you dispel some of those myths? I mean, how hard is it to officiate a game and get things right all the time?
You know, Jay, that's an interesting question because so I did 2 games, and but I trained for I had 4 games that I did before I did those games, and so the interesting thing was your whole purpose of going out there is to do the job, right? You don't care about what teams they are. You care about getting the job right, and it's just like playing. You know, you're competitive about it. You want to be good at it. And you want to, try to do the best that you can. And so for me, the hardest thing wasn't seeing, I would see things really easy because they had me at the umpire position, which at that time was still behind the line of scrimmage. So I was back there with the backers. And so I was seeing everything. My thing was, I'd go, oh, that's a hold, but I wouldn't throw the flag. It was the weirdest thing. And so I had to kind of train myself to when I did see that to throw it. And so I think the officials that go out there, I think they're trying to do their best. That actually kind of softened me towards the officials a little bit because I kind of understood a little bit better what they were seeing and how they were seeing it. So, there's always going to be mistakes because nobody's perfect. In every game, there's going to be something that should have been called that wasn't, and something that wasn't called that was. And so I think, I think we're actually in a pretty good spot with the officials right now. I think for the most part, I think they're putting too many rules in sometimes in the name of player safety. And it's one of those things, as soon as you attach that to it, it's everybody has to agree with it because obviously you want the players to be safe. But I mean, there's some things like I'm not a big fan of taking the head out of the game. I just think that's a big mistake. It's a big part of football, but it's also a big part of, injuries and stuff like that. So I think there's a balance here someplace. But I think if you've been yelling at referees for all these years, just to continue yelling at them because you're not going to change anything.
Well, that's one thing I know about you. You always like being back there with those backers, okay? But your wife, Patty, still ranks as one of the most dynamic gymnasts ever at Penn State and was on some great teams. Despite all that you've accomplished athletically in your career, how does it feel to be the second best athlete in your marriage?
Oh, just trust me on this one, Scrap. She reminds me often that she's the only national champion in this household. Every time she has her Nittany Lion trophy out there, and every time we'll walk past that, she goes, at least somebody in this house is a national champion.
If you were a world champion, does that not count?
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. You always go back to Penn State. We had great teams at Penn State, right? We lost one game as my sophomore year or Tom's junior year. We lost one game as my junior year. My senior year, I think we lost 2 or 3 that year. But we had great teams up there. We had great personnel. We had great coaching. And it's an elite program. And so when you're part of that stuff, at the end of the day, you want to have something to show for it. And, and there was our chance. Our chance was to hang a national championship up. It would have been Penn State's first national championship, and it ended up not being. So, and every time I see the Alabama guys, they still remind me that. They still remind me that they beat us. So it doesn't end.
Hey, Matt, let me say this. When I went down to Alabama a few years scouting some players, I see that banner hanging on the wall. I wanted to take it down, But I can tell you this, what's interesting is after 78, we had those guys that were freshmen with us, and by the time they got to be, fifth-year guys in 82, I think they learned a lot from what we went through in that game, against Alabama on January 1st in 79.
Yeah, and I think at that time in your career, really any time in your career, you can always bank something, right? You're always learning something. You're always figuring things out. And then it's always something that just adds to your experience. And when you can reach on that and experience, it makes you a better player, regardless of what it is. It always does.
So let's get back to that world championship talk. I heard a little bit of that, right? Well, you're currently tied with Jack Ham and Franco Harris, tops among Penn Staters, 4 Super Bowl championship rings. But unlike those guys, you got yours with multiple teams. Of course, they were with the Steelers. Is there any one team or owner that you most identify with, Matt?
Oh, heck. That's an easy question to answer. And so listen, there's only ever been one Al Davis, who, by the way, was your dad's good friend.
Yep.
Right? They spoke a lot. And Al had a little different approach than your dad, perhaps. But inevitably.
Both Brooklyn guys, though.
Yeah. Inevitably, the bottom line was win, right? They wanted to win. And they were committed to that. And it's funny because I'd hear that a lot from Al. I called Al Coach because he was a coach in the beginning. So I used to call him Coach all the time. And he would talk about your dad a lot. And he'd say stuff like, that guy back there at Penn State, he didn't teach you how to do that. So he'd give me little shots all the time. But I loved Al Davis. I thought Al Davis was a more than fair, very equitable guy. I thought he was a guy who loved to win and was committed to that. And those things weren't just slogans. Those were things that when he said, just win, baby, he meant it. And really, honestly, your pop was the same way. Your dad wanted to win. Your dad would probably put education up there a little bit higher than maybe Al would have. But then again, he was in a college program and not in a pro football program. So great respect for both those guys. But my favorite playing time was with the Raiders. And it was, it was the players I played with, but Al Davis set the tone.
Yeah. With Veterans Day being around the corner, and this being a month where all of football takes time to recognize those serving our country, talk about what it is like being part of a military family, and how much a month like this means to you.
Yeah, so I guess if you're not involved in it, you kind of don't think about it just in terms of the patriotism that you would see and that you experienced growing up, right? And so I had a lot of uncles who were in the military, but I wasn't quite the same. Of course, my pop went through everything, but it wasn't the same experience that I had than when my son went to West Point and then inevitably went to war a few times. He was out on a couple different whatever you call them, whenever he battle times, whatever they're called. But yeah, so it's different. It's a lot different. And so, but the similarities are there because, listen, when you put your kid out there and he's gone and he's in Afghanistan or he's in Iraq and Marcus was a little bit different because he was a Ranger and he was in some things that were a little sketchy, and we'll just leave it at that. So those don't make for some comfortable nights, and but we were one of the fortunate ones, and he came through it fine, and he's still in the military, and he's now down at the Pentagon, and anyway, he's doing well, and my hat's off to anybody who serves their time in the military.
Hey, for those too young to remember, can you put in perspective how good your Penn State D-line was with you, Bruce Clark, Larry Cuban, and Joe Lally anchoring that defensive front?
And those guys. The only guy I haven't really heard from lately has been Joe Lally. So I hadn't heard from Joe for a while, but all the other guys, I talked to them a lot. And so look, those guys, you don't find a lot of those guys. You go to the next level, you don't find a lot of those guys. But the thing that I loved the most about them was they loved to compete. They were very competitive. They wanted to win. And when you get around guys like that, it gets contagious. And you guys understand all this because you guys were the same way. And so when you get out in the middle of the field, not only is it a competition between teams, it's a competition between teammates. And it's a competition between offense and defense, but I'm going to win, right? It's our team. We're going to win. And within that realm, I'm going to win. But you have to do everything with great purpose and great discipline, and you have to be doing things the right way. And really that's the rub right there, because there's a lot of guys who get out there to play and they just want to do great by themselves, but it's about the discipline of scheme, and it's about the discipline of doing your job within that scheme. That's what makes it really fun. And that's the part really that you end up missing when you're through with the game.
Matt, you've worn a lot of hats with it, the player, the executive, the broadcaster, and we come to find out tonight also as an official. You were official as well, too. So, but look, last week we had Chris Fowler. We talked with Gus Johnson earlier in the year. Both of those guys gave us some insight into their preparation for calling a game. So let's continue that line of thinking. Most coaches comment you're meticulous with your film when you cover a game. How important is that preparation for you before a broadcast, and how different is that from being a player, evaluating your opponent week in and week out?
Yeah, it's not really that different from when you were playing, right? But here's what I know, and both those guys sitting next to you would understand this as soon as I say it. The tape doesn't lie. Coaches lie. Players lie. The tape doesn't lie.
That is true.
So when you go in there, what I would always do is I would always watch the tape first. Always watch the film first. Then you know exactly what happened. And look, it's not everybody has opinions, but it's your opinion. When you speak, Coach Madden taught me this, right? And he said, look, when you get up in the booth, you have to have an opinion on every player. And you can't be wrong because it's just your opinion. And so he said, what you have to be able to do is know the game, understand the game, and then know exactly what that guy's doing. Because you can't go walking in and talking to coaches and say, hey, when that guy was in a 5 technique, he did such and such. and and he was in a 3 the whole time, and you just sound like a knucklehead. So know what you're talking about, know what you're looking at, and then understand the game. And so I took that to heart, and I started studying it. And pretty much, guys, it was no different than coaching. So you end up breaking down everything. The only thing you don't know is what the calls actually were. So you're kind of guessing, but you can take an educated guess. But in the end, then when I got into up in Detroit on that end of it, and then you're looking at things, and I know what the calls were, and you're like, that's what we're doing? This is the call. This is what he's supposed to be doing. So, and to me, I was not easy on coaches, because if we're coaching one thing and I'm looking at another thing, that means you're coaching that thing. Am I right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's 100% right.
You either coach it or you allow it to happen.
Exactly right. And if you're allowing it to happen, that means you're coaching it.
Yep.
And so I would, I was not the easiest guy to get along with when it came to that.
Well, Matt, talent, skills, evaluation, your whole career, and we learned even the organ donor box. You check them all off. It was what we've learned in tonight's interview. I don't think we learned enough about Scrap in his college days, though, so we can wrap it up if you want to add one little tidbit in there.
Be nice.
I can't. Scrap's my guy.
All right.
Scrap's been around for ages, and so have I, unfortunately. So.
Well, he's been around long enough to be a Hall of Famer here in Pennsylvania, too. That just happened for him. So big congrats out to
Congratulations.
Scrap.
Thank you.
Good job,
you.
Scrapper.
Hey, Matt, it was a privilege, and I was proud to be your teammate and your friend.
Yeah, same here. You know that.
I know that. Thanks, buddy.
All right, take care of yourselves.